The Deer Hunter was released in 1978, directed by Michael Cimino, and stars an ensemble cast which includes Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, and Meryl Streep. I'm going to review four Vietnam War films over the next couple of days. Um, it's a subject matter that greatly fascinates me. I've read quite a number of books on the Vietnam War and on sort of American history in the latter half of the 20th century, things to do with the Cold War. It's something that really engrosses me. I was riveted by the Ken Burns documentary on the Vietnam War, which I think you can still find on Netflix. It's a magisterial documentary. It's one of the best I've ever seen. I really recommend watching it. And I think that it makes the Vietnam War makes for some of the most interesting films of all time. Certainly, some of the best coming from the sort of latter half of the 20th century, the 70s and the 80s. And the Deer Hunter is pivotal in that picture. It's one of the best Vietnam War films ever made. It's sometimes regarded as one of the best films ever made. It's not without controversy, but for me, I wanted to discuss it because I think that it's the most out of the films I've seen based around the war. It's the most human. It's the most sort of emotional and character driven of the Vietnam War films that I've seen. It's a gut punch of a film, really. I mean, it's a really sort of raw film in terms of the experience of watching it. It's not an easy film to sit through, but it is very good. So directed by Michael Cimino, this was his one hit wonder, I guess. When I did a bit of reading up ahead of the review, I discovered that Michael Cimino. I thought his name's familiar. I'm tempted to say he's done other things, and yes, he has, but they were all terrible flops. So he made a film called Heaven's Gate a few years after The Deer Hunter, which pretty much bankrupted United Artists. So this was his one hit. There were apparently in his private life he was a very strange character. He was almost a bit sort of like a Tommy Wiseau character. You know, his past was very mysterious. He greatly embellished his own experiences. I think he led people to believe that he'd actually been in the Vietnam War when he perhaps hadn't, or he perhaps had a very limited role. But this is, I guess, if you're going to do one film right, it may as well be The Deer Hunter. It's a film about the experience of the Vietnam War. It's a very neatly packed into a three-act structure. So you've got the first act of the film, which is you've got this group of men. It's their home life before going off to war. There's a very long wedding scene. The mid portion of the film is them in Vietnam. That's where you've got the classic scenes of them being forced to play Russian roulette. And then third act is post war and what happens to the characters that survive. It's a deeply engrossing film. I think it keenly sets out to show both the highs and the lows of human experience. So it goes from the beginning of the film where they're all in a pub and it's after work and they're singing, and then they have the wedding and they go. There are scenes where they go hunting deer, hence the film's title. Those scenes where they're riding a high, they're spending time with friends, and then obviously there's a sharp cut in the film. Actually, it very quickly transitions to them being held as like prisoners of war, in just the most horrible conditions you could imagine. And it's a film that's carried really by the strength of its actors. So I mean, Robert De Niro, he gives a very sort of modest, a very stoic performance. It's very different to anything else that he's done. Actually, I mean, he generally plays characters that are either sort of gangsters or kind of corrupt in some way. Whereas this is a rare film where his characters he's playing a good guy essentially, and he portrays the damage that's done to him by war. He goes to war and he's the strongest out of the group of friends, but it still shows you the way in which it damages him. It shows you how heartbroken he is. A lot of damage has been done to the lives of his friends. So it's a great performance from Robert De Niro, a very underrated performance by him. Christopher Walken's very good. I find that sometimes if you're watching a film with Christopher Walken, the sort of eccentricities of his performance like overshadow the performance itself. He's one of these people, everyone likes to put on his voice, everyone likes to sort of make fun of his performances. But I mean, this is early on in his career, and he is genuinely good in this. You can see that he is a genuinely sort of shattered figure in the film. And then the supporting cast is great. Meryl Streep plays a small role in the film. John Cazale, who was famous for films like The Godfather, The Conversation. He was a really big 70s actor. Life tragically cut short, I think, before this film was even released. He has a small role in the film, but he does very well in it. And it's the performances that I think carry a lot of the film. They give the film its heart. But the look of the film as well is really beautiful and really evocative. It struck me that during the scenes in Vietnam, unlike most films where there's a Vietnam War setting, you'll see there's a lot of like establishing shots, where they really want to show how beautiful it all is, even though most of them aren't set in most of them aren't filmed in Vietnam. They're usually filmed like the Philippines or somewhere, but they make a point of showing the expansive, beautiful countryside. This film doesn't. When they're in Vietnam, I mean, aside from I think there's like one or two shots where like helicopters and stuff that are to do with the plot, that serve the plot rather, but there isn't anything that shows there aren't these expansive countryside shots, and I thought that was an interesting choice because what they do show instead is that there are expansive countryside shots of America. They're in Pennsylvania, and when they go to the woods, to hunt the deer, it looks really beautiful. They're in the mountains. It's very clearly, I would say, like I don't know if it mentions this in the film. Actually, I didn't check, but to me, it looks very much like sort of autumn or very early spring, possibly winter. Although I guess somewhere like that would probably snow quite a lot in winter. But that time of year where it's not like very sunny, it's quite. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's quite bleak. And I think that's an intentional sort of cinematography choice because it's not a bright coloured film. It's a very muted film, and I think that serves the heart of it quite well. Ultimately, it's a film about the human psyche. Essentially, it's about human spirit. I guess you could say it's about how the highs and lows of human experience. And it's just a perfectly made film. I mean, the scenes where they're in the Vietnamese prison camp, they've been forced to play Russian roulette. I mean, it's consistently ranked as one of the best scenes in film history, and you can tell why. I mean, it's to watch it again. I mean, I've seen the film before, but to watch it again, it's still a very, very tense scene. You almost don't want to look, but you also kind of have to. So it's excellently done. The production design to all of that is fantastic. It really looks like a place you absolutely don't want to be. I think the controversy there's some existing controversy about the film that was true at the time. It's also true now of the fact that that there's this game of Russian roulette, but there's no recorded reports of the North Vietnamese rather ever using Russian roulette as a punishment or ever doing it to their prisoners. And I can understand people being quite aggrieved at that. Because it's quite a big thing in the film. It doesn't. I mean, I had a thought about it because it has bothered me once or twice before, where you get films that are about a historical event and they take liberties like that. There was a film a couple of years ago. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was to do with like the IRA and troubles in Northern Ireland, and it showed the British forces or the UVF or whoever doing these really horrible things to their prisoners that were actually completely fabricated. It never happened. I remember feeling quite annoyed at that because I thought that's not this is a film that's going be published as the truth, but that is in fact not what happened. So I guess from that perspective, I can understand why people wouldn't maybe would feel a bit unsettled by the fact that they have this in the film. But for me, the film doesn't pretend to be a historical account. The Deer Hunter is a fictionalized account. of what happened in the Vietnam War. The characters are fictitious, the events are fictitious. The core of the story is the psychological change experienced by these characters as a result of the war. And the Russian roulette scene is it's key to the film. I mean, it's one of the most pivotal aspects of the film because it's symbolic of the tension of that experience of not knowing whether you're going to live or die. It's a really key part of the film. So I think from a storytelling perspective, it's justified. And also, I think generally, if you're just criticizing the fact that the Vietnamese technically never did practice Russian roulette. I mean, if you're in a prisoner of war camp for either side in a war, whether it was the Vietnam War or earlier or whatever, it's unlikely to be a happy experience. You do hear, there were stories of multiple, horrible things happening to, to Vietnamese soldiers, to American soldiers, and just because they didn't do this one thing, for me, it doesn't bother me too much. Because they were generally, if you're staying in a prisoner of war camp, it's not exactly the Ritz-Carlton, the fact that they didn't actually do that doesn't really bother me. It's just such a powerful film. It really is. It's a moving film, especially towards the end, because it does have that core of of friendship, of moving along in life, of growing up. If I had a criticism of the film, I think the wedding scene at the beginning. So the first act of the film shows them, they work at a steel mill, they go to the pub, there's a wedding. That does drag on a little bit longer than it probably should. I get why they make it so long. They were sort of emulating things like The Godfather, big epic films, and they really wanted there to be a contrast between the light of the first half of the film and then the dark of the second and third act. They wanted there to be a clear contrast, and I get it, but I mean, I have to be honest. I feel bad for admitting this, but when I watched the film again, I did actually just chapter skip a few times with the wedding scene because I was like, yep, I get what happens. Yep, they're having a dance. Yep, they're having drinks together. Got it. And you know what? If you're watching the film for the first time, don't do that. But that was just me. I was like, I know what happens. It does drag on a little bit. So that's one tiny little criticism, I guess for the film. But it's overshadowed because it is just such a meaningful film. It's such a powerful film actually. And I think reading back on early reviews, it was clear to me that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was the first major sort of Vietnam War film, and it was the first one really to get into the horrors of it. I mean, this was 1978. The Vietnam War ended with the Paris Peace Accords in 73. So this was like 5 years later. I guess people were thinking we don't want to make a film too quickly. It was a too soon kind of thing. So this came out in 78. Apocalypse Now came out a year later. It was probably. I mean, who knows if it was the right time or not? I mean, it was well received generally when it came out. But I think the fact that it was such a gritty, unpleasant account of what the experience actually was. I think what was clearly difficult for some people to come to terms with. But it's a film that for me I think has it's aged well. It looks fantastic. It's a masterfully acted film. I mean, the actors all really deserve a lot of praise. And yeah, it's a film that really, for me anyway, it really sticks in your head. It's so powerful. It's about the human experience. It's about the experience of suffering, of war, the light and the dark of life, and I just think it's fantastic. As a rating, I'm going to give Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter 86. Yeah, 86 out of 100. It's a frighteningly good film. It really, really is. I would encourage you to watch the film, read into it if you're interested in the Vietnam War and stuff. Read into the making of the film. It's a very troubled production, which I find quite interesting to read about. You can read about the controversy as well, and yeah, The Deer Hunter gets my full recommendation.